All right, hello everyone. My name is Christopher Locke. I'm the IBPA Director of Membership and Member Services, and we're doing this webinar series called the Get to Know Your IBPA Member Benefits because we want y'all to know about all the amazing member benefits. Today we're really excited. We're going to be covering the Publishers Weekly Book Life Reviews Member Benefit. As today's presenter, we're very lucky to have the Chief Operating Officer at PWXYZ, the company that owns Publishers Weekly and Book Life. He's also the President of Book Life, Carl Pritzkat. Hello, sir.
Hey, Chris, nice to be here.
All right, I'm going to disappear, and thank you again for being here. I genuinely appreciate it, and I know our members do as well.
Okay, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here, and I'm going to press the play button on this. So hopefully this will be good. Okay, so as Christopher set up, the topic of today's webinar is how to get the most out of trade reviews. And Publishers Weekly, well, I'll start by introducing Publishers Weekly. I'll then describe what Book Life is. Publishers Weekly has a reviews service, which has been around a long time, which I'll talk about. Book Life has a slightly different service as well, which I'll talk about as well. And then I'll go into how every author publisher, in fact, every indie publisher, how everybody can get the most out of submitting for trade reviews. And then if you do get a review, what you should be doing with that, how that should integrate into your marketing, and then what to do if you don't get a review or if you have a bad experience with the review. So, but I'm going to start out by giving you a little background about Publishers Weekly. Publishers Weekly is considered the Bible of the book business. We are 150 years old, and actually I'm sitting in the library of Publishers Weekly right now, and behind me is our issue from 1872, which had on the cover an advertisement for Last of the Mohicans. So Publishers Weekly's been around for a long time, publishing weekly. And starting in the 1940s, they started doing book reviews, and we do currently 9,000 book reviews a year. And a lot of people, it's hard to wrap your brain around that, but we review 9,000 books every year, including books from the big 5 publishers and books from indie authors, from author publishers, and everything in between. So as you can imagine, it's a very difficult process to manage, and there's a lot of books. We get about 25,000 submissions every year. So to winnow that down to 9,000 is a challenge. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Book Life is a website that PW, Publishers Weekly, started in 2014, which is dedicated to indie authors, what we call indie authors. IBPA calls author publishers. And the whole point of Book Life is to give information and programs to help indie authors succeed. And one of the most important things that have developed since 2014 is our giving indie authors access to Publishers Weekly reviewers. And that's a little, that comment is a little more subtle than it sounds. And we're going to talk about in a sec the fact that anybody who is an author can submit their book to Publishers Weekly for review consideration. Doesn't mean your book is going to be reviewed, but you can submit your book to Publishers Weekly for review consideration, and it's completely free. You do it through Book Life, so you have to become a member of Book Life to do that, but then you could submit your book to PW that way. 2.5 years ago, we, listening to our members, we realized that not enough people were getting reviewed by Publishers Weekly, so we created a paid reviews service, which we call Book Life Reviews, and that's what we're going to talk about in greater detail next. But that is a place where people guarantee they can pay their money and they will hear from a Publishers Weekly reviewer. They'll get an opinion from a review from a Publishers Weekly reviewer. They may not like it, but that's what that service is. We also have some other services as well. We do an annual prize called the Book Life Prize, which gives you a very brief critique written by a Publishers Weekly reviewer. So that's also a popular program as well. But we realized that access to Publishers Weekly's reviewers was an important part of what we were doing at BookLife, so that our author members could sort of get feedback, get professional feedback on their books. So let's talk first about the Publishers Weekly reviews. Again, these have been around for a long time, for decades. Many people consider them the most prestigious review in publishing. The reason Publishers Weekly reviews are so important is that a lot of bookstores and librarians use them as a primary criteria for whether they're going to bring in a book into their institution or to their store. So a lot of libraries require a Publishers Weekly review and a favorable Publishers Weekly review in order for a book to be acquired. And in the case of bookstores, it's the same way. They're going to look at a Publishers Weekly review and say, well, you know, they say this is a good book and it's going to be commercially appealing, so I'm going to bring in more. Or they say it's a great book, even though it may not have a huge appeal, but I'm still going to bring it in because of the critical claim. But that's the sort of the prestige and importance of a Publishers Weekly review. The reviews are editorially chosen. Again, we get 25,000 submissions every year. So we have a group of 10 editors that have an expertise in a specific genre or group of genres. So we have a mysteries editor, we have a romance editor, we have a sci-fi editor, we have specific categories of nonfiction editors. And they then develop a list of reviewers that they can farm out the books. When they get a book submitted in, they look at it and they say, okay, should we be reviewing this? And if they say yes, then they take that book and they farm it out to a reviewer. And then in a few weeks, the reviewer gives them the book back with the review. They then edit it, and then they edit the review, and then they decide when to publish it, if and when to publish it. So that whole process, it's in the editor's judgment whether they're going to choose a book. And a lot of times it's because of a particular topic the book is talking about, or a particular voice the book has, which they think is important, or they may just know this is going to be commercially important, so they do it for that reason as well. The key point there is, if you're submitting to Publishers Weekly for review, it is not guaranteed that it's going to happen. And I guarantee you there are people from Penguin Random House who write us in frustration saying that, you know, why wasn't my book reviewed? And again, the editor is the one who is the arbiter of that. It is free to submit. They are not paid reviews. They're completely free, no charge at all, to submit to get a Publishers Weekly review. It doesn't mean that you're going to get reviewed, but it is free to submit. You will see in a moment what Publishers Weekly review looks like. They're what are called a capsule review, which means it's short. It's 200, 250 words. They have a fairly straight ahead structure to them, which in a couple of sentences is about recapping the plot. So again, these are written for booksellers and librarians. And the whole point is to give them an idea of what the book is, what it's about, and if we think it's good, and if we think it's worthwhile. The other thing I forgot to put on this list is these reviews are done 3 or 4 months in advance of the book coming out, because that's the time that librarians and booksellers are making their purchasing decisions about these books. So, and we'll see in a moment, we'll talk about the importance of sending in your galleys long in advance. But that's especially true with a Publishers Weekly review, because they want to have the review out well in advance of the book being on the street. We also know that self-published authors don't work under the same production restrictions that traditional publishers do. So a self-published author is oftentimes doing print on demand, if they're doing print at all, or they're doing digital only. So that means that you don't have a 6-month lead time or a 9-month lead time like traditional publishers do. So in the case of self-published books that are submitted, we don't have such rigid date requirements or advance requirements on sending in a galley. What's important to know, and we'll see in a second, is that a Publishers Weekly review, if it receives a star, that's the editor's way of saying this is a really great book. It's a sign of excellence when you get a starred review. And I will say that we give out starred reviews to author published books, to indie author books. So there's no, it's purely about the quality of the book. It doesn't have to do with whether it came from a big publisher or an indie author. We give starred reviews where they are deserved. And then an important part about Publishers Weekly reviews, and we'll talk about this with our other reviews as well, is that they're syndicated. So we have about 35 different organizations ranging from Amazon and Apple Books and Barnes and Noble to some of the database services like Ingram and Baker and Taylor and other organizations like that that are in the metadata business. We syndicate our reviews to these people. They actually pay us for that, which is part of the reason we're able to survive. But an important part of getting one of these reviews is then having it syndicated throughout the industry to these data providers like Ingram and Baker and Taylor, and also to the retail platforms like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Apple. So that's an important part of it. I'm going to now show you what a Publishers Weekly review looks like. It's very hard to see. This is in print. You can also go to publishersweekly.com and see our reviews there. They're free and available for anybody to access. But as you can see, they're not super long reviews. They're short and sweet. The first review in this example has a star next to it. That means it's a starred review, which means which is probably why they put it first in the list of these things in the reviews. So this gives you an idea. In the print magazine every week of Publishers Weekly, this is what the reviews look like. The Publishers Weekly reviews. This is what they look like. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we're going to move on to Booklife reviews. So Booklife reviews are a different beast. First of all, they're guaranteed, and that for a lot of indie authors, and also for indie publishers as well, and even some larger publishers, they want to make sure that they get a review of a book. So they would like to have something predictable, and they pay for it. A Booklife review is done by a Publishers Weekly reviewer as well. So even though you're paying for the review, you're still going to get a professional assessment by a Publishers Weekly reviewer, who is somebody who is an expert in the genre that they're reviewing, or they're familiar with that genre that they're reviewing. So that's an important understanding of it. Also, Booklife reviews publish in the pages of Publishers Weekly as well. They look different, and they're in a different section because they're paid, so we want to keep that separate. But Booklife reviews run in Publishers Weekly. The author or whoever paid for the review has the opportunity to look at the review when it's delivered to them, and they can decide if they want it to run in Publishers Weekly or not. And there's no obligation to do that. So if you look at the review and you say, I don't like what this reviewer said about my book, I don't feel that they captured, or you're not comfortable with that, you don't have to run it in Publishers Weekly. But if you do get the review back and you see it and you say, you know what, this looks great, I'd like to show it to the rest of the world, it publishes in Publishers Weekly for no extra cost. It's part of the $399, which is what it costs to buy one of these reviews. There's also a $100 expedite fee if you want to have it a little faster. It normally takes 6 weeks to deliver a Booklife review, and if you pay the $100 expedite fee, it's 4 weeks. The format, the actual review that you get is slightly different as well. It's longer. It tends to be 300 to 350 words. It has a few elements in it that a Publishers Weekly review doesn't have. For one thing, it's got a takeaway line, which is designed for you to be able to use very easily in any marketing of your book. It also tells you about comp titles. And this is a really important part, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, about sort of finding the right readers for your book And we have found that for a lot of author publishers, for a lot of indie authors, they don't always have a strong sense of the genre that their book is in, and also of what comparable book titles and authors are for their book. And the reason those things are so important, and we'll talk about it in a bit, but it makes a big difference in terms of how you're going to market your book, where you're going to market, and who you're going to ask to read your book based on the genre that it's part of, or that it should be part of. So we provide those comp titles to you just to say, okay, from a professional standpoint, this is what we think your book, this is who we think your book is in company with. Not necessarily in terms of quality, but definitely in terms of topic and voice, and how it's speaking to an audience. And we also give production grades on the book cover, on the editing, on the interior design of the book. So we have those again, so that we can give sort of professional feedback to authors as well. And again, the goal of these is to, unlike the Publishers Weekly reviews, which are designed to be read by librarians and booksellers, they're designed to help librarians and booksellers make a sales decision. The purpose of a Booklife review is to help the author reach the right reader. So the whole frame of that review is to say, okay, this book is going to appeal to these types of people for this reason. It's probably not going to appeal to these people, and it's still giving, you know, a reviewer's point of view. It is a review, but the point of view is slightly different. We're trying to help you reach the right reader. Like the Publishers Weekly review, Booklife reviews are syndicated as well to the same people I was talking about, to Amazon, to Barnes and Noble, to Apple, as well as the database services like Ingram and Baker and Taylor and those people as well. So it is helpful for you in terms of your marketing, and in terms of your metadata, and in terms of getting the word about your book out there, to have a Booklife review. That's if you choose to approve the review. If you don't do it, we won't syndicate it. Here is an example of a Booklife review, actually two of them, as they appear in the pages of Publishers Weekly. The first one, and it may be hard to see on your screen, but the first one has a little editor's pick notice on it with a lightning bolt, and an editor's pick is our way of saying that this is really a great book. This is the editor saying this is above and beyond everything else. But you can see the review includes the cover of the book, the review itself. There's the takeaway line at the bottom. It also has the comparisons down at the bottom as well, of other authors and books that are good comparison. And at the very bottom are the production grades for the book. So that's basically what a Booklife review is. And again, there's the Publishers Weekly review, which is completely editorially determined. Our editors sit there and they have to make the painful decision of deciding how to take 25,000 submissions and winnow them down to 9,000 reviews that we do every year, as opposed to Booklife reviews, which are guaranteed, but you're paying for a Booklife review, which is $399. Both of them are going to show up on the pages of Publishers Weekly if that's what you want. Both of them are done by Publishers Weekly reviewers. But the Publishers Weekly review is a little tighter, a little more focused, definitely geared towards librarians and booksellers, as opposed to the Booklife review, which is a little longer, has other elements in it that are going to help the author understand better how they can reach the right reader. And both of them are going to get syndicated out to the various outlets. So I don't know if anybody, we have plenty more to talk about, but if anybody has questions or anything, and I know, Chris, if you see any, let me know.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So thank you for taking the time to answer them. So one question that people have is, Publishers Weekly Booklife reviews, they are for independent publishers and author publishers, right?
Correct.
And so if you're an independent publisher, you also then sign up with a Booklife account, and then on behalf, how does that work?
Good question. And boy, that's a really great question, and it sort of gets into the weeds a bit. But so and I'll try to keep this. I mean, we have a hard time understanding it here at Publishers Weekly. So if I don't explain it well, please follow up and I'll try and explain it better. If you are a indie author or an author publisher, you should submit your reviews for both Publishers Weekly reviews and Booklife reviews through Booklife. You go onto Booklife, you create an account, it's free, it costs you nothing. It basically, creates an account for you, and then you can create what we call a project page for every book that you have that you want to submit. Whether it's a PW review, which is completely free to submit for, or a Booklife review, which is $399, you're going to do that through Booklife. If you are an indie author or an author publisher. In other words, if you are the person whose book you are submitting, then you should be doing it through Booklife. Now, if you are a indie publisher, let's say, and you're going to be submitting books for review consideration, and they aren't your book, you're not the author of that book, you're the publisher of that book. And the same thing also applies for PR people as well, but won't go into that necessarily. But if you're a publisher who is submitting books on behalf of other people, then you're going to use Publishers Weekly, publishersweekly.com, and it's a system called Galley Tracker. And most publicists and publishers know this system because that's how they submit their books for Publishers Weekly review consideration. So whether you want to submit a book for PW review consideration or Booklife review, which is the paid review, if you're submitting on behalf of somebody else, if you're a publisher doing this on behalf of your authors, then you're going to use publishersweekly.com/Galley Tracker. And Galley Tracker is all one word and is lowercase. And it's free to create an account there. It's free to set up an account in both places. And the reason we have this system in place is for what we're talking about. If you're an author publisher doing your own submissions, then Booklife is set up for you. If you're submitting on behalf of other people, then Publishers Weekly's Galley Tracker, publishersweekly.com/Galley Tracker is the place to do that. And you'll find it much easier to do it on behalf of other people using Galley Tracker. If you used Booklife, you'd have to create an account for each author, which is cumbersome. If you're an author, that's great because it actually allows us to get more information about you, and also you're able to give us more information about yourself, so we can do more things to help you. So that's a very long-winded and very detailed response, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you for clarifying that. I know that's something that people get confused about. And on that note, so, some indie publishers don't necessarily have the budget to submit, like let's say they'll submit for a Publishers Weekly review for free, right? That's free. But in terms of getting if they don't get that, then the paid, they might not have the budget. So some authors might wonder, well, if they set up a Booklife, would it have been better if their publisher had submitted their book for a review, or it doesn't really matter? It has the same amount of chances of getting reviewed.
It does.
Okay.
So, but the only note I'll say on that, and this again is real subtlety into the weeds, but as we talked about before, a Publishers Weekly review from a traditional publisher, from a book submitted from a traditional publisher, and let's say that that's not an author publisher, but somebody who has a team who's working on behalf of their book. Publishers Weekly has a requirement that they need to receive a galley for that review submission at least 3 months before the street date of the book. So for instance, if you have a book coming out on October 15th, then Publishers Weekly wants to have received that galley by July 15th. And they're very strict about that because they want to make sure that in every week's issue of Publishers Weekly, that the books that they're reviewing are probably 2 months away from the street date, ideally 3 months from a street date. So they're very strict about that. They're not so strict with self-publishers about that, because self-published books, again, don't have, it's not like somebody is going to have to, for instance, the salesperson for Penguin Random House comes into a bookstore, and when they're selling them, the bookstore owner, and they're saying, okay, here are our books that we have coming out. They're talking about books that are coming out 3 months from now or 2 months from now. So in order for Publishers Weekly to be doing its job for booksellers, we need to have that review in advance of when that salesperson is going to be there. On the flip side, we know that self-published authors don't work the same way. They don't have a salesperson coming in 3 months in advance to do it. So PW treats self-published books differently in terms of their date requirement than they do with traditionally published books. Otherwise, the two avenues are treated exactly the same. So that's.
Thank you. Yeah. So sometimes people are hesitant to get a paid review, right? Like Booklife, because they worry that like librarians, booksellers, the book companies that might buy their books don't view them the same as the free reviews. So can you speak to that concept of whether or not it's viewed the same way, or is there some type of stigma and they might not see it as being as legitimate?
Yeah, and I think that in reality, of course, there is some stigma attached there. The best thing you can get is a starred Publishers Weekly review, and if you have that, amazing things, doors will be open. An editor's pick Booklife review is in our minds the same, but of course, people aren't going to judge it exactly the same way. They're going to say, well, you paid for that, and it isn't quite the same. That's where I think a lot of and we're going to talk about this later, a lot of that depends on the how you take advantage of the review that you received. And I mean, the one thing is that your review is going to run in Publishers Weekly, whether it's a Booklife review or a PW review. If you okay the Booklife review to it, it's going to get syndicated out to people. So that's important too. But I think whereas a starred PW review might really truly open doors, I think a Booklife review gives you ammunition to go out and open those doors. And I think based on what we've heard, what we continue to hear is that the quality of the Booklife reviews is highly respected by librarians and by booksellers. So if you go into somebody and say, hey, look, this is what I received from Booklife, which is from a Publishers Weekly reviewer, they said this about my book, they'll say, yes, okay, that's true, and they'll give you that respect. But it may not be on their radar as much as if it was a PW review, especially a PW starred review. So I mean, that's not the greatest, not the clearest answer, but I think that's how, in reality, how these things shake out.
Yeah, no, and thanks for your being candid about it. You could have just been like, it's the exact same thing. Everyone should buy books. So
No, it's not. Yeah.
So I have some people are, I think, a little confused about the concept of syndicating the reviews out to the different. They're wondering in terms of like, how does it affect how Amazon and Barnes and Noble view a title? I think maybe they're wondering if like does it get like, I don't know, more marketing, or does it get out there more? Right. Yeah. It's literally just you're just sending it so they have access to it. People. Okay. Right.
Correct. And in the best of all worlds, and this doesn't happen with PW reviews or Booklife reviews, when what they're going to do when you go to a Barnes and Noble page or an Amazon page for a book that had a review from us, which then Amazon or Barnes and Noble bought from us and ingested, they're going to show that review on the more information about that book page. So and the idea is, and I wish I had better figure to quote this, but people, when they make a buying decision, let's say they go to your Amazon page and they're looking at your book, they see reader reviews, which are very important, and that can help with people. But when they see a trusted third party name as a review, they give it even more weight. And that's what every author wants, is for a person to come to their page and see that, oh wow, Publishers Weekly said this, or Book Life by Publishers Weekly said this about my review, then maybe I am going to, give it a even more credence than I would have just looking at the user reviews. So that's why you want that syndication. The same thing happens with Ingram and Baker and Taylor. If I'm a librarian and I say, somebody came in here yesterday telling me that they're local and they have this book that they want me to buy, and I buy through Baker and Taylor, I'm going to go into my Baker and Taylor interface, look at the information about that book, and I'm going to see, oh, you know what? It has a Book Life review, or it has a PW review. I'm going to click on that, look at the review, or I might even just say, oh, well, if they've got a review, then it means they're legit, they're serious. So that's how it can help, is by getting into the data on these services. Amazon doesn't care about it. Barnes and Noble doesn't care about it. Ingram and Baker and Taylor don't care about it. They just take that piece of data and they plug it in to the other metadata for your book, and that's how it's helpful and why it's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Some people are wondering about, so the Book Life review will be in a Publishers Weekly magazine, right? It'll be one issue, and the question is then, like, how do they know which issue? Because it's exciting. They want to see which one. How do they find that out?
Yeah. So when your Book Life review is delivered to you, and it's online, you get to approve it. And when you approve it, it not only gives you the date of the publication, when it's going to come out, usually about 4 weeks from the date that you're approving it, but it also lets you order extra copies for $1.50 a copy, which is not a trivial amount. So if you say, like, wow, I love this so much and I want to make sure I have 10 copies that I give out to, or I want to make sure I have a stack of copies when I go into stores to say, hey, look, here it is, and leave it with somebody. So we not only tell you the date that it's going to run, but we also give you the opportunity to order extra copies. I think some people wish we could do that on the PW review side, because a lot of times people are sort of broadsided when they get a PW review, like, oh my God, it finally ran, or something like that. And alas, because that editorial process is much more convoluted, we're not able to do that on the PW side. But the Book Life review side, definitely, when it's going to come out.
And then let's say a year later you want to get more copies of that magazine. Like, is there a cutoff point where you can't order that issue?
Yeah, the reality is it's much easier to order in advance than it is after. We sell one-off copies of our issues, and there's a place where you can go online and do it. It costs more at that point. I think they cost $10 an issue, and we could possibly run out. So if you said, I want 1,000 copies of this, I think we keep 200 or 300 extra copies of every issue that people buy in sort of onesie twosies after it's published. But beforehand, because we place print orders with every issue that we make, you could say, I want 1,000 copies, and it would be no problem at all. And it would also be much less expensive at $1.50 an issue than it is after the fact, because after the fact we have to store it someplace, and it's more complicated.
And in terms of let's say the moment someone clicks submit for their review, how long does it take to get the review for Book Life?
For Book Life, it's guaranteed within 6 weeks. And if you want to pay an extra $100, it's 4 weeks. And then, so let's say I was like, wow, I want to get my review as soon as possible. You do the $100 expedite. You'd see your review within basically 28 days. And then on that 28th day, if it didn't come earlier, you'd see the review. And if you loved it, you'd say, yes, I want it to be printed. And it would take another 4 weeks before it showed up in PW. So it would take, like, the quickest it would be 8 weeks. On the PW side, things move very slowly in terms of getting a review considered. So it can take months for it to happen. But as I say, when it does happen, it's a great thing. And we review PW reviews hundreds of indie authored, author published books every year. So it definitely happens, but at a slower pace.
Okay, great. Well, so obviously we have more questions, but I know you have a lot more to go through. So I'll go away again, and then we'll
Thank
we'll
you
ask
for
more questions. Yeah,
thank
thank
you
you.
for assembling this. Okay, so those are the reviews. We talked about, we have two types of reviews. So what I want to talk about now is what are ways you can put your best foot forward, whether you're submitting for PW reviews or Book Life reviews. And really they're the same in terms of what the reviewers are looking for and how they're judging you. Um, and I don't think there's going to be any surprises about this first slide here about the most important thing you can do for your chances of review, but that is professional editing. And as much as I will say that, and I'll say it, and I'll say it, I'll say it, I'll say it, all of us are like, well, no, absolutely. I believe in professional editing, which is why I had my husband do the thing on this, or which is why I had my niece, or why I had my, it's like, no, it's very important to have somebody who doesn't know you and who's willing to tell you things that you don't want to hear, edit your book. And depending on, how that can be a whole process if you want them to be into developmental editing and so on and so forth. But at the very least, you have to get a professional editor to go through there and just make sure that in that first page of the book that the reviewer is reading, they don't see any typos, they don't see any grammatical errors. They see something that is smells professional. And I mean, I don't know how to say it any better than that. And it's so interesting because I am not an editor, I am not a writer, I'm not a person, but sitting around all these people now for the past few years, boy, you can give them a book, they'll open it and they'll go, oh, geez, in the first paragraph, they can tell what's going on. Now, granted, you're doing it for a whole book, but it is so important to have your book professionally edited. And just, I can't stress that enough. And it's a different path for author publishers than it is for somebody who's being traditionally published. Because if somebody's saying to you, hey, we love your book and we're going to give you some money and support in order to publish your book, when they tell you things you don't want to hear, it's a little easier to listen to. But when you're doing it all yourself and you're paying for it yourself, and you've just paid somebody, let's say $1,000 or $2,000 to do an editing job, and then you see something you don't like, you're like, how dare you? You didn't understand that. But that, of course, is the type of feedback you need in order to make your book, to challenge your book to be the best it can be. So enough said, and I'm sure that IBPA has some great webinars about editorial services. So make sure that your book has been professionally edited. Not too surprising is the next slide as well. Make sure that your book has a professional cover and design. And you can just take the same spiel I just did and replace editing with design and cover artwork. And for anybody who says that books aren't judged by their cover, they are wrong. And reviewers and editors judge a book by their cover as well. So it's very important that your cover is well designed, that the interior of the book is well designed. It's different if you're submitting something EPUB wise, depending on the digital format, but boy, that cover should be rock solid, and it should be something that you could go into a bookstore, because these are professional reviews. These are not people saying like, oh well, we're gonna be a little nicer to these people because they publish this themselves. Nope, you're getting a perspective from somebody who is judging a whole line of professional books coming through. So your book cover has to be professional, and if you're doing the interior, it should be professional as well. Blah blah blah. And I'm sure you've heard this before. And again, Christopher probably has some great webinars from designers that you can, as IBPA members, that you can get as well, because great designers are worth their weight in gold. Also, and this seems, again, some of these feel a little more trivial compared to what we were talking about, but a description, a professionally written description of your book is very important. And it's not a rambling sort of like, well, I sort of thought I wanted to do it. No, it should be succinct, it should be clear, and it should convey what the book is about, and really make sure that somebody can read those 30 words, 60 words, whatever it is, and say, oh, okay, I get it. This is a fantasy about a blah, 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 blah. Jane Friedman, who's I'm sure done IBPA seminars, she did a session for us at our Indie Author Forum in March, where she took people's descriptions that they submitted and then she honed them and rewrote them, and it was like almost like a religious experience, because you realize and so many times besides the cover, your description is the first foot you're putting forward for people. So making sure that description is good, making sure that your metadata, and this is going to relate into something else we're going to talk a bit too, is in there too. We need to know, first of all, what the proper identifiers are for your book. Is it, if you're going to be outside of the Amazon environment, what is the ISBN number for it? If it's inside, what's the ASIN, which is Amazon's ID number? How many pages is it? What type of formatting is it? Is it just an ebook? Is this a trade paperback? All these things. We need to know your name properly. We need to know the page count. All these things which seem so sort of, oh yeah, that's easy. Well, it's got to be presented clearly and succinctly and well, so that when we look through this, when we look through a submission, if it's all sloppy and doesn't make sense, then right away you say, oh, well, this isn't somebody who knows what they're talking about. Also, a lot of our reviewers and our editors are going to go look at a website for your book. And a website is maybe old-fashioned now, but they're going to look at your book online, and they're going to look at how it exists online. So the same thing, if it looks like it was thrown together and is sloppy, they're going to use that as when they judge you, and they are judging you. That's what a review is they are judging you, hopefully constructively, but nonetheless they are judging you. So those things seem sort of outside of this, that we're talking about book reviews, but you are judged by those things. So then this is where our Booklife reviews editor, if he were here right now, he would talk to you for an hour and a half about this alone. And this is very sensitive, because most people, when you ask, so who's your book for? They'll say, well, it's a picture book, but I think it appeals to people of all ages. And like, no, okay. What you have to do is you have to be very cool-headed and professional again about what is the genre of your book. And genre, and again, I come from outside of book publishing, so for me, genre was just sort of like a label that you put on something. But in fact, genres of books have entire communities around them. And more importantly, these communities have expectations about a book. So if you're writing a romance about an alien who lands on Earth in the year 2022 or whatever, 2200, let's say, what you're going to deliver in that book is going to be different than if you say, I have a sci-fi book, sci-fi fantasy book, which is about an alien who lands on Earth in the year 2200 and falls in love. Those two genres have different expectations about what's going to go on in that book, how the story is going to be revealed. And not to say that it should be trite or it should be formulaic, but there are expectations. And if you don't understand what those expectations are, if you don't understand what those audiences look for and how they respond to certain things, then you will have a problem when you market your book to those audiences. Or conversely, or not conversely, but related, the same thing with a reviewer. If you say, okay, I'm submitting my book as a romance, we have a reviewer who deals in romance, and they look at your book and they say, wait a second, what's going on here? Why are you doing this? You can defy genre, and that's an important part of artistic creativity. But if you're doing that, you better understand that genre and understand what its expectations are, what its audience expectations are as well. And that is probably one of, beyond not having your book professionally edited, that's one of the biggest problems we see, is that people who don't understand their genre, they don't understand the body of works that their book is going to be judged alongside of, so that they have a better understanding of relating, connecting to that audience. And it translates through the cover of the book. It translates through really how the voice you're using in the book, all of these things. So really, before we started anything in this presentation, I should have started with this. And my Booklife reviews editor would have said that to me. Before you start anything, understand the genre of the book that you're doing. Even if you decide to defy that genre in certain ways, it's going to make your job, your life as an author and a publisher so much more. It's going to have so much more impact if you understand that genre and you understand the other books in the genre. You understand what that audience in that genre looks for. So, I mean, I'll beat that horse quite a few times because it permeates through so many of the other things we've talked about. But that's incredible. It's like the one takeaway you could take away from today is understand your genre. And if you read more books in that genre and know who the great authors are in that genre and what the readers of that genre debate about all the time in terms of the books being presented to them. And genre can be nonfiction, it can be fiction, it can be any age, but that's incredibly important. Let me see. All right, and then the final thing on this part of it is your author biography. So obviously, as we've said, it should be professionally written. It shouldn't look like, you know, you just sort of pulled it out of your head. But what's really important for an editor, whether it's a Publishers Weekly Reviews editor or the Booklife Reviews editor, is they have this huge stream of books that are going across their desk. They want to understand why you were the person to write this story. And again, this isn't about justifying yourself artistically. Anybody gets to write any story they want, but they want to have a better understanding of who you are, what expertise you have. In nonfiction, expertise matters a lot. In fiction, experience matters a lot too. You're trying to tell them give them an idea of who you are, what these experiences and expertises are that you have that brought you to this point where you are going to write this book, and then also your credentials as well. And credentials can be, you know, advanced diplomas if you want, or it can just be sort of life credentials to say, and that sort of intersects with experiences. But they're going to invest some time and energy in looking at your galley, at the submission you've given them. They want to know, why does this person think they can write a book? What makes them think that they're not only that this is the story they wanted to tell, but that they have the technical abilities to do this. So that is your chance to sort of express that to them. And again, not to be defensive about it, but to say, oh yeah, the fact is I worked with this particular group of people for my whole life. And finally, I thought it was important to document their stories. And because I'd been doing this, you know, somewhere else, this is why I did this. That's going to tell an editor, oh, okay, this is something I'm going to look out for. I'm going to pay a little extra attention to it. So your biography, besides being professionally written, needs to sort of tell us, why were you the person who should be writing this book? Why should they trust you to be writing this book, and or give you a leap of faith is probably too strong a word, but nonetheless, they want to see what you had written. You've got to convince them that in your biography. I think, right, okay. And one final thing on this too is timing. We talked about this, and I think we answered some of the questions about this too. It's important to get your review out there early. You can't get it out there any earlier than it's ready, though. I mean, so make sure you have all the materials and everything in place. But if you have a choice of deciding on things, and I've just been going through this with a friend of mine, instead of saying like, well, you know, I'm gonna have everything done on November 1st, so I'm gonna release it on November 2nd. Actually, you know, get everything ready and then give yourself time to actually submit things, not just to Publishers Weekly and Booklife, but to other places, and to get your ducks all in a row. The earlier we have it, the better it is for us, especially on the Publishers Weekly side, as you heard me explain. But also, the earlier for you, it's the better as well, because depending on what review that you get, you're going to be able to use that review to get other reviews. You're going to be able to use that review to go into your local library and say, hey, here's the review that I got look, here's the copy of Publishers Weekly that my review is in. This is my book. This is why it's important. And then of course you can do that through any other, social media promotions, with any other promotions you want to do. That review should become, and even if it's one sentence from what was otherwise a fairly mediocre review, but nonetheless, if you can say, boy, this author has incredible spirit, great, use that and really go forward. Make that be the focal point of your marketing campaign. But you can't do that unless you have the review. If you're doing the review long after the marketing campaign's already out there, then you're not going to get as much out of the review as you could have. So that's my spiel on timing. Okay, so before we get into worst case situations, more questions. Let's have more questions.
Well, you might be getting into this, but if you get a negative review, can somebody resubmit the same book for a new review, hoping it's a better review?
No.
Yeah, one shot.
And that's one shot, and that's a PW policy, and we do it for both Publishers Weekly reviews and Booklife reviews. So, and I can't speak to other organizations, but no, you do have one shot, and it's the same thing even if your book is on the PW side. If your book is declined for review, you've submitted that one time, and that's it. I will say, I'll put in a little plug for the Booklife Prize, which we talked about. And the Booklife Prize it's a writing prize. So a lot of people submit us their manuscripts. They haven't even brought the book to market yet. And because it's relatively expensive, it's $100, and you have a PW reviewer who gives you a very structured critique on your book, a 4-point critique on your book. We do have people who will give us every year the same manuscript. So we'll see the manuscript over the course of 2 or 3 years, and then at the end, once they feel like they've had enough feedback from us, and I'm sure from other people, then they'll actually publish it and submit it for a review. But that's more of like a critique service. But in terms of the reviews, we do have it just the one time. That's your one shot. Now you can submit something for PW review and it's declined or whatever. You still can submit something to Booklife review or vice versa. So you might submit something to Booklife review, not like the review you get, but you still can submit to a PW review at any time, a year later or whatever the case.
And in terms of the manuscript, you mentioned this a bit, but the Booklife review, they should be giving you the finished version. Like, because some people are like, oh, you all, like, the PW needs it 3 months before it's published. Well, then that means you should change your publication date if your book's not ready. Like, what they give you is the best version, edited, everything.
Right. And I will say, like on the PW side, a lot of times we'll get galleys from the publisher, which will say, this galley we're giving this to you now. It has one more batch of, and these would just be like, proofing. They're not going to be substantial changes, but there might be commas or something like that would be changed. And they'll say that, and they'll say, hey, because of timing, I'm giving this to you, but it has one more edit that's coming. So it will alert people to that. But I would, especially if you're an indie author, I would be leery of doing that, simply because I think it's better to have your best foot forward on that.
And in terms of the timing, there's some people are asking about like when they give y'all the book for like Booklife. So with PW, 3 months has to be, but technically for Booklife, it can be published already or before. So people are wondering, like, is it still better though to submit your book for Booklife 3 months before publication, or does it not matter? What's the timing, the best timing for them?
Right. So, I'm probably being confusing. I've created confusion on this, but Publishers Weekly is absolutely a bugaboo about the pre-pub date on traditionally published books. They don't hold self-published books, author-published, indie author-published books to that same date requirement. So in theory, you could have written a book 10 years ago, and if you are publishing it yourself, you can still submit it for Publishers Weekly review consideration through BookLife. The things that come through BookLife don't have that. It would be an extraordinary case, but it has happened where they'll review it. If they see something that's 10 years old, they're going to say, well, you know, what's the importance now? And it may be because it was, you know, the person. There are situations where that's happened. So one shouldn't be put off by that. On the BookLife side, we don't care about the pub date at all, right? So a BookLife review, you can submit a book for a BookLife review anytime at all. And if you're a self-published author, you can submit it for PW anytime at all as well. But what I was just saying is, in theory, you want these things, you want to review as early as possible in your marketing process so that you can use it in your marketing materials. And a good review or an important review helps you get other reviews. So if you want to get a review from your local newspaper, if you want to go to the local radio or TV station and say, hey, I've done a book about this issue, which is hyper local, and it's really important. I want you to interview me. You can show them that review, and it really helps. So the idea is to get that review as early in your process as possible. That said, as Christopher said, you don't want to do it before the book has been properly edited, before the cover is properly done, and all those things, because you will be judged on those things, and your reviewer is gonna, you know, even if they pretend that they aren't, they're still going to make a judgment of you based on what that cover is and the quality of it.
Yeah, I mean, something that we always say at IBPA, and this is something especially for author publishers, is do not rush your publication date. Like, it just, your book publishes once, get everything in order, and push your publication date as far out as you need to make sure that everything is perfect leading up to it. And like you were saying, like, it is better to have the trade review before the book's published. So fine, put your publication date later. You know, it's like you are in control. That's one of the great things about being an author publisher. You're in control of when you publish it. So wait and get everything ready. So thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. And some people are kind of wondering about the comparison between like, you know, BookLife and some of the other trade reviews that are like paid out there. Partly because, for example, I've heard this, and you can clarify this. So, like, when you go to like a bookseller or a librarian, is it okay to just have one trade review, or do they expect you to have more than one? So can you talk about that, and then also maybe some of the other trade reviews out there that, you know, are like kind of comparable to a BookLife?
Sure. Yeah, I think that any is better than none, and more is better than one. You know, so I also, it depends on the policies. I've talked to a lot of people where certain, and this is more so on the library side, where they have committees and where there's sometimes the buying process can be a little more formalized than at a bookstore with a bookseller. But some people who will say, oh yeah, if it's paid, you know, some libraries will say if it's paid, we won't consider it. I think that's getting less and less because of all of the things we're talking about, that there's so many self-published or author-published books out there that are deserving and really are having an impact. And I think librarians are understanding that a lot of times they don't have access to non-paid reviews the same way that traditionally published books do. I mean, Kirkus is obviously has both a traditional, you know, non-paid review service as well as paid. The difference there is that if you're an indie author at Kirkus, you have to pay. They don't review Kirkus Indie only works, is the only program if you're an indie author that way. I'm not as familiar with Forward and the differences between Forward reviews and their Clarion, which is their paid reviews. But those are two other of of the big ones that come to mind. I mean, there are a bunch of other smaller services, and I don't know. I'm not sure what type of impact they're going to have. A quote from somebody, especially a third party, can look very good however it's presented. So it can be from your local, swim club, and it can say, "Wow, this book really rocked my world." And you say from the Redondo Beach Swim Club, okay, that's not going to carry the same weight as saying, Publishers Weekly or New York Times Book Review or something like that. But nonetheless, it is a third party thing. So a lot of times it's what you make of it that I think is important. But in terms of the cred that you're given by libraries and booksellers, I think it varies a lot between who you're talking to, the different library systems and the booksellers that you're talking to, and it's also going to depend on the service that you're using. I mean, I think Publishers Weekly, the Earth rotates around Publishers Weekly, so anything we do is highly respected. But of course, in reality, out in the world, there are other services that people like and respect as well, and I think Kirkus is definitely one of them.
Yeah, afford reviews. So I want to give you time. It's already after 11, so I want to make sure that you are able to have time for your presentation.
Sorry. So I didn't realize we were going so far. So the one thing that happens is, this happens a lot on the PW side, where you've submitted for a PW review and you were declined for review. And the point I always say is definitely don't give up. As I said earlier, PW receives 25,000 reviews a year. The editors are making really difficult decisions, not just on author published books, but also on traditionally published books from the big 5 publishers on down. So they're faced with difficult decisions. And what's really important is that every time you submit a book, an editor does look at them. And so even though it may take 4 or 5 submissions on your part, every time you make a submission, you should be telling the editor a story about you, about the types of books that you write or publish. And I guarantee you the editors look at those and they start saying, wow, that person has submitted, this is the 3rd book that they've submitted. And I really like them. And I think what they're doing is very cool. I haven't had the ability to because of, whatever the thing is, but they'll remember you. And I think it's important to know that the point of submitting the review isn't just to get that review, it's also to develop a relationship with the editors so they start to know who you are. Again, it's very important that you're writing in a genre that's appropriate to your book, that you're submitting to the correct genre, but that person will start paying more attention to you, and that can help over time. The other thing that happens, and this is, and I will say on the PW side, PW really won't publish a bad review of a self-published book. And the philosophy behind that is because there's no reason to. It's not like a librarian or a bookseller was going to buy your book, and if it wasn't for that negative PW review, they would have bought it anyway, which does happen on traditionally published books where, this is the 25th book in a series by a famous writer XYZ, and we come out and we say, you know what? This is a dud and nobody's going to care about this book because it's lousy. Okay, that's important for us to tell booksellers and librarians, but it's not important for us to tell us that this is PW I'm talking about. It's not important for us to tell those people that a self-published book isn't good. What's important for us to do is to tell if a book is good. So that's an important thing. So I mean, I digress there, but PW isn't going to really give you a bad review, although some people sometimes complain about a word or something like that. On the Booklife review side, we definitely give out bad reviews because you paid us $399 to write a review of your book. And while we try to be constructive and we try to always find something that can be praised in a book, the fact is we're also going to tell you if we think that a book has problems or isn't good. So the important thing is it's one opinion. And I have a sheet here, which we're not going to have time for me to do, but I always bring it here. And these are famous lousy reviews that were given to Lolita and to Willa Cather's O Pioneers and to Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I mean, these are like, this book isn't worth anything. It's just one review. And PW has a history of giving bad reviews to books that went on to great acclaim, critical acclaim, as well as commercial acclaim. So when you submit for a review, remember, it's just one person's opinion, right? It's not, the whole world's saying that your book is bad. The same thing is, and I'm sure we've all seen this, where you can pull positive out of a review, right? Even if it's one thing that says, despite this author's enthusiasm, they did a lousy job. And then it says, oh, well, they praised this author's enthusiasm or something like that. So remember that there's usually something positive in there. But the other thing is look at what the reviewer is saying. Is there something for you to learn from that? Even if you disagree with them, or even if it makes you angry, is there something you can take away from this? And at least with a Booklife review, we're going to talk a lot about the audience and the audience expectations. Are you going to trip up this audience when you go out there and say, yeah, this is a great mystery? And they're going to say, no, actually, the pacing is too slow, and that, so on and so forth. So really learn from your reviews. But at the bottom of it all, make sure that don't let somebody discourage you from doing what you're doing, right? You got to believe in your work. You have to be the believer in your work, because there's going to be too many opportunities for people to knock you off track. And then the final thing is really resist the urge to complain. And most people come and complain to me with their bad reviews, whether it's on the PW side or the Booklife review side. And it's, as I say, it's one person's opinion. That opinion is probably going to stand, and unless there's factual errors or something like that, which can absolutely be changed. But if you're arguing about somebody's opinion, it's probably not worth it, and it's better to just figure out what the best is you can get from it, and then move on. So with that, I'm also going to put, all right, so takeaways: research your genre, as you heard me club you over the head with that. Obviously, professionally prepare all of your materials, submit as early as possible, as we talked about, and don't be discouraged. I guarantee you that even if you get a terrible review and a lot of people are saying, oh, bad things about it, there's somebody out there that wants to read your book. And the challenge is always to connect with them. But your book has the ability to connect with somebody and change their life. So don't be discouraged about other things that go on. So with that, that's my contact information. If you ever feel free to contact me if you want. Happy to. And I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sorry we've run over, Christopher. So
No, don't be sorry. I appreciate you giving your time. This is incredibly important information, and you are the expert. So we're glad to have you to ask the questions. Another question people are having is the concept of like having, so you all say your review, right? And it's not necessarily like completely negative. It's just kind of mediocre. It's not like glowing. So people are wondering, so should they still publish that? Like, is it still better to have a review from Booklife, or should people only like publish publicly the ones that are like really glowing?
Well, I mean, and everybody's heard this phrase, but I'll say it again: the only bad publicity is no publicity. So, and I will say from experience, most people would prefer to see the words in print rather than to not see the words at all. So I think most people decide to publish it. But I will also say that we all tend to have very thin skin when it comes to criticism of our work. And so, and I've lost friendships over this with friends who were like, I got my PW review and it was, it was terrible. And you look at it, it's like, no, it's a praising review. They did have issue with one particular aspect of your writing, but everything else they love. No, and they can't, they're blinded by the bit of criticism from it. That's what criticism is it's going to try to point out the good and the bad. So I think most of the time, as long as there's something in there that people can grab a hold of and say, yeah, okay, I am a fan of, space operas that take place on distant galaxies, and whatever the thing is, I'm going to go for this. I think that you will find that most people benefit from having it in print, in the magazine, rather than having a wounded ego and saying, I don't want anybody to see this.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm an author publisher myself, so I know how hard it is to get something that's like a negative review. But like you were saying, Carl, the worst thing you can do is to engage like online if like a person gives you a bad review or something, or even like Book Life or Publishers Weekly. Don't go on their Facebook page and just let it go. Just let it go.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you don't want to. Don't put negativity out there. It just makes you look bad as someone who's an author. So people were wondering about Book Life. Do you all have tools for authors and publishers to gauge the effectiveness of their advertising, their Q&A reach, or billable services, things like that? Like ways to market, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we do have some services that are available, including Q&As, and we have some statistics on it, on those things. And so if somebody's interested, in fact, we're just finishing up a media kit right now, which is going to be online probably in the next couple of weeks, which will have information in there. But I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're looking for in terms of like metrics. If you do a review, let's say your review is printed, we won't necessarily tell you how many people read it or how many exposures it received or something like that. If you're buying an advertisement from us, yeah, then we do give you more specific information like that.
Yeah, well, Carl, this is excellent information. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Again, you're the expert on all this stuff, and I'm sure everyone would love to just sit down with you for an hour and pick your brain. But this was the hour, so thank you. And again, we also really appreciate the member benefit. And just so everyone knows out there what the member benefit is, our IBPA members get a 20% discount on a Book Life review. So it's normally $3.99, so then it's only $3.19. So make sure, again, to take advantage of that. And thank you to you all for offering that. I'm going to push stop of the record, but we won't all disappear. But for everyone out there watching this video, thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.